What's up? So for those who don't know, I've been asking a bunch of friends and random strangers on the internet, etc., about what their least favorite emotions are. Because actors are humans too, no matter how we seem to behave and how we act. And we can often avoid, even if it's just like subconsciously, or we can cut corners when it comes to portraying and performing our least favorite emotions. So I thought, let's do stuff where we deep dive into the ups and downs of each emotion, the dark side, and then also the possibly underestimated or underacknowledged, underappreciated potential good side, and then figure out how to apply that to how to perform them. And today's emotion is depression. So I'm going to preface this with a disclaimer. This is going to be talking about depression. That includes the symptoms of depression. That includes possible studies and research on the biological potential theories behind why we have depression. The risks of depression. The risks of depression do include self-harm and suicide. So we will touch on those topics. We are not here to moralize about any of that, to have any kind of statements on should, shouldn't, etc. I'm not a professional for treatment. If this is something that you would need help with when it comes to properly handling symptoms, managing them, and getting treatment so you can live in a healthy place, we're going to put up resources right now. And also later, whenever my brain remembers. So if this video is just not a safe one for you to listen to right now, then click a different goofy one. Go listen to me sing Harry Potter music, whatever works for you. I really, really, really don't want this to stress anyone out. All right, disclaimer over. So first up, we've got to define depression in the context of this video. Because, I mean, honestly, even referring to depression as an emotion is not inaccurate. So I'm going to be dealing in this video with two primary variations of depression. Clinical depression, or major depressive disorder, which is depression. I mean, this is the way that we understand depression now. And then depression as an English word that refers more ambiguously to an emotional experience, more akin to what we call depressive moods. The definition of the former. Depression, as we now understand it, the medical illness, is a biological condition that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and the way you act. Like most biological conditions, it's affected by a combination of nature and nurture. The body and brain chemistry that you were born with and the genetic instructions for that body and chemistry that you inherited from your parents, and then the environment that you're currently being exposed to. But prior to our medical knowledge of the condition, the word in a literary sense has this definition: to put down by force, to crush in a contest or struggle, to overcome, subjugate, or vanquish. It's this common theme in the definition, the idea of lowering someone or something, of pressing or forcing down. That is why the word depress can refer to the economy, angles in science, the act of physically pressing, or a human emotional experience. This etymology also helps us understand that the experience of depression emotionally, it's the feeling of being crushed down, usually by an external oppressive force. One of the environmental triggers for depression is being oppressed, whether it's by a greater society at large or from abusive individuals in your life. We tend to have this preconceived notion that emotional experiences are internal. But these older English definitions suggest we have thought otherwise and continue to think otherwise. And if you're an awesome actor who has already watched my How to Have a Real Human Emotion for Actors video, then you know emotions do not happen in a void. They are reactions to environmental stimuli and triggers. The only part that is internal is the unique way that we react to this stimuli. This is because we are beautifully individual little complex biochemical machines with years of unique programming based on our personal past experiences, and all of that informs how we respond to stimuli. That's the internal part. What makes you different, how unique you are, and how that influences how you react. But ultimately, we're still just responding to external stimuli. So, just saying. Back to etymology. Around 1621, the word depression became associated with being de-spirited. Now, if you know me, you know my obsession with the word spirit, because its root word is spirare, or to breathe. Breath has been seen as human life force, either related to or just actual human life force, in multiple places around the world and multiple cultures for ages. Prana is the Sanskrit word for both breath and life force, the idea that our life force flows through us, in and out of us, just as our breath does. With our breath is our breath. Chi, a form of energy typically believed to be intelligent, flows throughout the world, and harnessing our breath is a way humans can work to harness their chi, which is why breathing is such a critical part of studying and practicing Tai Chi. In Hebrew, in the Old Testament, at least two separate words can be translated as both breath and spirit. I apologize if I mispronounce. Ruach and nefesh. In the New Testament, in Christianity, clearly translating the Greek word pneuma becomes very difficult in identifying whether it refers to breath or spirit. Or maybe you're a Jedi and you just want to call all of it the Force. But still, these examples are just the tip of the iceberg of the ways throughout humanity's history that we have associated breath with the experience of having a spirit. There is a very ancient relationship between breathing and the experience of spirituality, the experience of soul. From this information, we begin to see the picture of being de-spirited, D being away or taken from, and spirit, our spirit. The concept of being separated from our spirit as also being one of being separated from our own breath. Breathing is one of the fundamental parts of being alive, and it only stops when we stop being. This word etymology history section doesn't really help us understand the root causes or even possible evolutionary reasons depression might continue to exist in humans, but it does help us understand a little about the experience based on how we've described it for generations. Okay, so moving forward, because the older non-medical definitions of depression are relatively obsolete in usage, I'm going to refer to major depressive order as depression for the rest of this video. When you hear me talk about depression, you're hearing me talk about the medical condition. If I need to talk about anything that references the temporary experience of depression emotionally, internally, I will refer to that as depressive moods. So what's happening in the brain with depression? Let's look at what we know about the chemistry. We seem to know so far that there are three major monoamine neurotransmitters in the brain: dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, that seem to be the biggest deal when it comes to depression. Sidebar. Neurotransmitters are basically chemicals, typically hormones, that are released at the end of one nerve fiber, usually after the nerve was triggered by an impulse of some kind, and then travel to another nerve fiber, passing that impulse and that information from one nerve to another nerve throughout the brain. External stimulus is what will usually activate the nerve, and then the neurotransmitters communicate this. Most of our current medications to help treat or alleviate the symptoms of depression involve trying to assist the brain in either producing, transmitting, or receiving a healthy amount of these neurotransmitters. Bear with me, I'm going to try to spark notes, the nerdiest parts. Serotonin. It's in our guts, bloodstream, and our brain. And from what we know so far, it seems to be connected with the physiological experience of reward, mood stabilization, sleep, digestion, even healing physical wounds. It's made from the essential amino acid tryptophan. Yes, that tryptophan, the thing that's in turkey that makes you feel sleepy at Thanksgiving. Then norepinephrine is considered a stress hormone, released into the blood when the brain perceives a stressful event. And it's released at high levels in the famed fight or flight or freeze or befriend response. And then dopamine is a feel-good neurotransmitter. It plays a role in the physiological experience of pleasure. It also helps us focus and find things interesting. It helps us think ahead and plan. It helps us be motivated. For all of these, too much of these neurotransmitters can be just as bad as too little. And as far as I can tell, we don't really know how much is too much or too little for individuals. We have population averages and ranges of kind of normal accepted levels. However, what is a healthy baseline for one individual, as far as I understand it, can be higher or lower than a baseline for someone else. So if you get tested by a doctor, in theory, you could receive numbers in the normal range of acceptable hormone levels that are actually abnormal for you compared to your baseline. Or you could receive abnormal testing numbers that maybe aren't that different from your personal baseline if your baseline is close to one of the more extreme ends of the population average range. So it would be great if we could do some more research on that. But wait, there's more. More recent research has actually begun to notice a shrinking of the hippocampus in the brain of a person experiencing depression. So the hippocampus is a region of the brain where a lot of activity regarding memory and emotion and how they combine take place. And then the cells and nerve networks that make up the hippocampus start to deteriorate with the disuse. So what we're learning is it may not just be what chemicals are or are not being properly transmitted from nerve ending to nerve ending, but that the nerve networks themselves might be reducing their communication altogether. Now, so far, it doesn't appear that this is a root cause of depression. It's from what I could read, it seems that this shrinking of the active areas of the hippocampus is a byproduct of depression that can lead to more depression. It is an unfortunate spiraling symptom. And if you're worried, it looks to be very reversible. You can absolutely reactivate those neural pathways. So this is not like
oh no, your brain is going to be ruined forever.
No. But why this is relevant? These are the main points I'll want you to remember for later on in the video when we talk about portraying depression. Depression affects how you experience the world and living in it. It affects your ability to connect emotions to memories, to form new memories, to remember long-term memories. It affects how frequently and how intensely you experience stress and fight or flight mode. It affects how frequently and how intensely you feel joy, pleasure, reward, how you sleep, how you digest, how your blood cells dilate or constrict, and what your heart rate and blood pressure is. It affects how much you focus and have motivation in activities around you. And to you, this is just gonna feel like living. The best parallel I have for it is I am asthmatic. It just feels like breathing to me. When I am not getting as much oxygen as I need or as the person next to me, when my body is still keeping CO2 even when it should be releasing it, it just feels like breathing to me. I don't know that I'm not breathing how the person next to me is breathing. I don't know that I'm not getting enough oxygen. So just hold on to that when we talk about portraying depression. But what about genetics and evolutionary biology? So far, everything has been, some pun intended, very depressing. It makes me want to yell, who the hell came up with this depression thing? And why do humans still have to deal with it? Seriously though, everything that we humans are still dealing with has somehow survived years and years of evolution. If something really has zero survival benefit, it's most likely going to die out over time. And if it doesn't fully die out, it's at least going to be extremely rare. But depression has been around for so long and is so prevalent, pretty much any evolutionary biologist is going to have to ask the question, is there enough of a benefit to depression that it's continued in the human species? And if so, what would that be? Or is depression somehow tied to genes that are beneficial that we do select for? And so the depression is a negative byproduct of otherwise beneficial traits that do contribute to our survivability. Why does depression exist? And why does it exist in such large numbers? And this is something that some evolutionary biologists are starting to investigate. Keep in mind, evolutionary biology hypotheses are very, very hard to test in a traditional scientific method way, right? We can't isolate a control variable. We can't apply our tests. Those kinds of research tend to be piecing together things using history, genomic sequencing of fossils, similar cases where we could test some specific aspect of our theory and then apply the results of that test to the overall theory, blah, 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 blah. That being said, I love evolutionary biology personally, but I also understand that theories from this discipline of science are not always put through the same rigorous parts of the scientific method as, say, traditional chemistry. So, back to the evolutionary biology theories we have so far. What do we know? First off, There are plenty of things that don't help us survive that exist because they are simply a byproduct of growing old. Our body is built to deteriorate and eventually die, so things that get worse in that part of the process, the aging process, are going to stay with humanity even if they don't help us survive, because aging and dying is part of living. So long as you make it past reproductive age, then it's fine by evolutionary standards. But this doesn't really work as an explanation for depression, especially because many people experience their first bout of depression in adolescence and young adulthood, kind of peak evolutionary biology time. So that doesn't seem to work. There are traits that possibly could have helped us survive at one point, but don't suit our modern lifestyles where conditions are so different than they were 100 or 200 years ago. To be fair, yes, evolutionary changes happen at a lot slower of a pace than like our modern technological changes. We've got a new iPhone coming out like every year, and we don't have a new tail coming out every year. That still really doesn't explain depression either, because depression has been found in every culture that has been carefully examined. We're getting into gray territory here, but including societies that are considered to live in environments we believe similar to those that were dominant in our evolutionary past. That leaves us with, what if depression is an adaptation that comes with both evolutionary costs and benefit? We know the costs: isolation, lethargy, reduced pleasure in activities, trouble performing everyday activities, anxiety, and ultimately, really big costs, danger to self and health, both life and limb. We also noticed individuals who scored highly on intelligence tests, which, by the way, intelligence tests are flawed indicators of intelligence, but it's what we've got in this case because we need something repeatable, testable, etc. We found that those who scored highly on these tests were also more likely to suffer from a range of mental and mood disorders, including and especially depression. So, going even further, we then tested individuals who were actively depressed while they were depressed, and we tested them on complex problems, and they scored higher on the test than comparative non-depressed individuals. And then we did laboratory experiments indicating that depressed people are better at problem-solving social dilemmas than non-depressed people. So what gives? What do we do with this information? The theory with that information is that depression is a possibly kind of extreme adaptation to help us problem solve, especially really, really complex problems that take a lot of analysis. Rumination is a symptom of depression. Depressed people think persistently and intensely about problems, especially the problems they're experiencing, having a difficult time focusing on anything else. But ruminations, that way of thinking, has also been found to be highly analytical, helping us break down a large, really layered and complex problem into smaller components, and considering each component one at a time. Analysis requires a lot of uninterrupted thought, and depression coordinates many changes in the body that help people with that time of uninterrupted thought. Help people analyze their problems without getting distracted. In order to stay focused in your brain, neurons have to fire constantly in the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, and it's exhausting. They can, think of like a car engine overheating. They can get worn down. But the 5-HT1A receptor, a receptor that binds with serotonin and is linked with promoting depression and appears to still somehow have been preserved by natural selection in multiple species. This 5-HT1A has been found to be involved in supplying neurons with the fuel they need to keep firing and to prevent them from breaking down while they do it, i.e. this receptor, which is also linked with increased depression symptoms, allows our brain to stay focused on problem solving for longer without getting distracted with minimal neuronal damage. Isolation, disinterest in other hobbies, even loss of appetite could all be working in tandem to help us problem solve. I mean, literally chewing and other oral activities interferes with the brain's ability to process information. And so somehow our bodies take that off the plate. But wait, There's more. We have a whole different theory. We're just beginning to understand the links between the immune system, inflammation, and depression. We could do so much more research on that. Inflammation is going to be huge. Have I mentioned yet that serotonin and norepinephrine are also majorly involved in the neural pathway for experiencing pain, physical pain? Depression, anxiety, stress, these things activate many of the same neural pathways as being stabbed or hit. And there are also a lot of studies that show us links between depression and our gut and digestive tracts. Well, it appears that the genetic variations that seem to increase our likelihood of depression also affect the immune system. Some of the alleles we believe mean an individual is more likely to battle depression also appear to be alleles associated with enhancing your immune response to infections. Courtesy of improvements in public health and medicine, infections are no longer the threat that they were to our ancestors even 100 years ago, she says in a pandemic. But a certain mutation of a gene we call NPY are associated with increased inflammation, which would help us fight off infections, especially in childhood, a huge time of risk for death due to infection in most of human history. Researchers at the University of Michigan's Molecular and Behavioral Neuroscience Institute discovered that individuals with MDD were more likely to have this mutated NPY gene. Many of us have a version of NPY that tells our body to make higher levels of a neurotransmitter known as neuropeptide Y, NPY, which seems to increase our tolerance of stress. Yay! However, the same mutation that likely protected our ancestors against pathogens better also codes our bodies to produce less neuropeptide Y, and therefore a possibly larger reaction to stressors, which might culminate in depression. So, less stress, better survival against infections. Take your pick. Those with symptoms of social withdrawal, lack of energy, loss of interest in activities, those symptoms may also have helped us avoid exposure to infectious agents by not wanting to see other people, focus our body's energy on healing first and foremost instead of using it on other activities. Those could have been competitive adaptations that could help in combating infection. Importantly, this theory seems only to be relevant for those individuals with MDD who also show biomarkers for elevated inflammation levels and those specific alleles. Not all individuals who have MDD or who struggle with depression have elevated levels of inflammation. So the theory is limited to those cases where you have both depression and elevated levels. And this theory does not say that depression is good for you. It's more positing that depression could possibly be a trade-off cost that comes along with genetic mutations that helped us survive better against diseases as children. To clear the air for a second, it can be weird to talk about evolutionary biology reasons for something to exist that does impact us negatively and that has perhaps caused a lot of harm in our lives. So please, please know, just because we have scientists who are looking for possible benefits of depression or adjacent benefits related to the same genes that carry risks of depression, it does not mean that the dangers and the risks that come with depression are any less severe or serious. Depression is a major killer around the world, and a person who suffers depression deserves all the support and help in the world. And in no way does this research lessen the severity and the impact and the life-changingness of dealing with depression. So please do not think that I'm sharing this information to put a shiny bow on a really, really serious disorder. I think it's important that we don't think that there is one right way to be a human or one right way for a brain to function. I think most variations of being human have pros and cons. And it's our lot in life, it's each character's lot in life to see what box of rocks each of us was born with and then figure out how to make the best of it, which includes support and systems and coping mechanisms and medication and whatever it takes to make the best with our funky, complex little individual biochemical machine of fanciness. So just as I don't think there is anything wrong with having depression, it doesn't mean it's any less dangerous. That's what I want to get across. Now we get to the fun part, how to use this as an actor. So, science nerd part over. Now it's just us, theater nerds. So how do we use this to perform parts better, especially Chekhov Russian parts? Well, first, identify what you're working with. Are we dealing with a character who is currently struggling with a depressive mood or an episode where they're battling depressive emotions? Or someone with chronic depression, MDD, clinical depression? If the former, are the depression symptoms we see in the script symptoms of a different underlying root cause? Then go do research on that root cause. That's a different issue. If the latter, if MDD, then remember that you are a person with a physical experience of symptoms. It's not some general sadness performance of emotion. Imagine trying to do the 100-meter dash at the Olympics. Now imagine that the atmosphere is the texture of molasses, the ground is toffee, and you have to do the same thing. Depression is a physical experience that colors every aspect of your life. So performing someone with depression, you still have to know what 100-meter dash you are trying to run, and then you have to know what it's like for you, what obstacles are affecting you that might not be affecting other characters or you, the actor, in your personal life. We've talked about what are you fighting for motivations in the past in my How Not to Be a Boring Love Interest video, and it's important here too. Many actors will see the list of symptoms of depression, having no interest in activities, lethargy, etc., and interpret it as having no motivation when we're performing a depressed character, as giving up when we see certain outcomes in a script. But what if we tried having objectives, having wants and needs, but we just have added obstacles in the form of the symptoms of depression? And what if we play these scenes as the constant Sisyphean task of battling these obstacles? What if we are fighting for something, but it feels like every minute our brain and our bodies are telling us no? We can run the risk of dehumanizing characters when we label them with diagnoses, when we label them with anything really, mainly because once we have the label, we can end up playing the label and not the real human. So instead of playing a label, try applying the symptoms of depression from the research as obstacles, experiences, a filter in the way the character is experiencing the world, what they're going through. And using that research from earlier in the video and more research that you can do in your own time, if the first theory from evolutionary biologists holds water, then your brain and body might be constantly trying to solve an immensely layered and complex problem. So what problem is your character trying to solve that is taking away from their ability to function in other ways in life? Is it a solvable problem, or is your character working on an eternal task? Are you trying to find the meaning of life and purpose in a capitalistic hellhole? Are you trying to find philosophical, financial, and sexual freedom as a woman in a historical time when you were legally property? Can you play the scene with you trying so hard to pay attention to your scene partner and the immediate circumstances, but this underground, intense, complex problem solving that your brain is trying to do just keeps stealing your focus? Secondly, let's get specific to your character. Can you use backstory and specific external triggers to make your character's experience of depression truly unique and specific to them? Do they know what's happening to them psychologically, physically, emotionally? I mean, does your character, have they ever heard of depression before? Or is this completely unknown territory? Given how much time in history has been spent with us not knowing about depression and not treating it as a valid diagnosis of the body and the brain, is your character from a time in history or a community, a socioeconomic class that would be able to help them with what they're experiencing? Or would they be treated differently, poorly for what they're experiencing? What knowledge is available to them in their time and place and setting? From our studying, we also know that depression has a genetic component. So Are there family members who have also battled depression? And does your character know about them? Are they whispered about in family meetings, or is it totally new? Also, from our studies, we know that depression can be influenced by environmental circumstances. So what in your character's environments could be reinforcing their depression, could be oppressing them? This can be personal level, this can be societal level. What things might your character have already that can combat it? Do they have support? Do they have training, education, or coping mechanisms? Do they have medication? And then finally, get personal with it in that figure out how this would feel and exist as an experience in your body. We are all born with unique brains and biochemistries that interface between us and the external world. The color red that you see is not the exact same color red that I see because we have different eyeballs and different brains and different bodies. The happiness that you feel is different than how happiness feels to me. So to some extent, we all human a little differently, and actors are always learning how to portray that. Many of those differences are small and don't really affect our daily lives, like the differences in perceiving color.
Close enough.
So approximating them is very easy and requires very little imagination or effort. But some differences, like MDD, are much bigger. So look to your script to see how big of an impact depression is making on your character and their life, and then identify how much effort you will need to put in to do the emotional experience justice. If you have had similar emotional experiences to the character, analyze what the similarities and the differences between your experience and the characters are. We look for the similarities because you want to build on them. You want to take what you can relate to in your imagination and then use your empathy and use your understanding of the character to expand and kind of magnify that so you can get to the level the character is dealing with. But to avoid projecting your own experiences onto the original writing and the character, recognize the differences between your experiences. When you perform, you're going to be pulling back on those differences. You're going to turn down the volume on what is different. But I do believe to really honor someone else's lived experience, we need to not underestimate the differences. And then we also need to not overlook the shared humanity. It's always about balance. Am I right? So that's, give or take, what I would say is hopefully information that you find useful. The last thing I want to add for this video. The lines between a character and the actor will get blurred because we are trying to literally embody a character. We need our technique to be able to do that well, but there is humanity that has to happen before that, where we have to recognize who that character is for them. Just as you need to recognize your friends and your loved ones for who they are, not who you want them to be. It's not a kindness to project onto other people. So when you are dealing with someone who has emotions that you might not want to have in your personal life, it's about understanding what they are going through and how that is different than you, and honoring that and recognizing that, and then putting on your actor hat and using your technique to step into that, to physicalize that, to bring it to life. But it is not you getting to say, oh, I know what it's like to go through depression. I mean, if you do, you do. That's the fine balance. Yeah, so there. I still think the structure of this video could use some improving. Feel free to leave advice, and I'm going to try to do another least favorite emotion later on. Bye!